We'll do a review in Likutei Sichos in Chelek of Gimel, volume 23. This is the third Sicha for the Parshas Pinchas. It's a Rashi Sicha in which Rashi brings down that the 70 Purim that were brought during the Yom Tov of Sukkot correspond to the 70 nations. The fact that every day they were diminished because it represents the nations of the world. The total is 70. It represents the nations of the world who are going to be diminished. And then Rashi continues the next Rashi that the Kvasim over there, the total is 98. That corresponds to protect them from the 98 curses that we find in the Torah. And the Rebbe brings a whole new insight over here to understanding the Rashi, what it means that the Rashi says that it's a sign of Kloya Lahem for the nations of the world. And then Rashi brings down that in the time of the Mikdash, it would protect them. How could it be Kloya and protect? The Rebbe will go through. But in the Sikha, there is some gewaldige insight into the various numbers of the Karbonis. And Rashi doesn't explain the Elim, he only explains the Purim and the Kvosim. What about the Elim and how that numbers? Some very, very beautiful, interesting insights into all of the Karbonis and why on Sukkot we brought Shnei Elim, answers Rashi. We'll go step by step. Aleph, Eifun Posik umin chosom v'niskehem laporim. So this is in the Parshas Pinchas when it talks about all the Karbonis. So we're talking now in middle of the Karbonis that are brought on the Yom Tov Sukkot. So first the pasuk talks about the first day Sukkot and the Karbonis that were brought then. Then the pasuk says the Karbonis that take place on the second day Sukkot. And then the pasuk follows up with the Karbonis that took place. There were libations. Umin chosom, v'niskehem, the mincha and the libations that come together with the Purim. So it says la Purim for the bulls, and the pasuk says you do them as kamishpot, as mentioned by the first day, the mincha and the nesachim of the first day. The same thing is repeated on the second day. So this pasuk was stated by the Karbonis from the zweiten Tag Sukkot, by the Karbonis that we bring on the second day of Sukkot, is Rashi Mefarish. Rashi explains that Porei HaChag Shivim Heim, the total number of the bulls, the Purim that you brought on Sukkot between the 7 days of Sukkot is 70. What's the number 70? Keneged Shivim Umois Shemisma'atim V'Hulchim. This corresponds to the 70 nations, and they are continuously being diminished. Misma'atim V'Hulchim. So you start off the Karbonis with 13, and then you go to 12, and then you go to 11 to the 7 days, and you total the number of 70. So the nations of the world are continuously being diminished. Siman kloya lohem, that is a sign of destruction for them, quoting Rashi. Ubimei hamikdosh hoyu maginim aleihem min hayisurim. In the times, in the days of when the Mikdash was, and you brought the Karbonis, then they would protect them, the nations of the world, from pains min hayisurim. The Karbonis that they brought on Sukkot protected the nations of the world from pains that were going to befall them, if not for the korbanos that the Yidden brought, which totaled 70, which is connected to Umas Ha'olam, and that protects them. So, what is the first approach? What would be seemingly the problem? Of course, the Rebbe is going to explain it differently, because the Rebbe is going to have problems on the superficial or first approach, what we think. But the simple approach that one would have is that Rashi wants to know how come the Karbanas start with 13, go to 12, and go to lower numbers. And Rashi says because it corresponds to the nation of the worlds which are continuously going down. As you learn simply, is by Rashi in Koshe. What is difficult to Rashi? Vi kumtes as the pore hachag seinen Pinchas. How come that the bulls that we bring on Sukkot keep on getting less? We start with 13, we go down to 12 and 11. How come? And Rashi answers as the pore hachag Zainen, that the Porechag correspond Keneged Shivim Umas Shemismarti Ba'ilchim. They correspond to the 70 nations that keep on going down and being diminished. When do we see this point that the number of the Purim keeps on going down? That's only in the second day. The first day it says there was 13. We don't know that it's going to get less. When you come to the second day, and the Torah says you only brought 12 Purim, you see Mismati V'elchim. That would explain why Rashi explains that it goes Keneged the Shivim Zikain, the Shivim Umais, is because Mismati, because it corresponds to the nation of the world. So Loidem is Euch Verstandig. According to this, the way we are explaining it now, what Rashi is trying to explain, why did they keep on going lower, is Verstandig. Favos Rashi stellt dem Pirush erst bei the Psukim von dem zweiten Tag Sukkos, why he only explains this commentary by the verses that are on the second day of Sukkos. Und nicht gleich beim ersten Tag. Not by the first day. Rashi could have commented and say the Purim correspond to the nations of the world. But over there, we would not have the problem yet, because we don't know. There could be a lot of reasons why it's 13. The Rashi's problem becomes, why is it keep on going lower? While the Schwierigkeit in Posik, because the difficulty in the verse was is machriach dem pirush, as the pore achag seine keneged shivim umes. Where does the difficulty become in the verse, which therefore forces us, because of the difficulty, to explain that the bulls brought on Sukkot, on the Chag, correspond to the Shivim Umes, wird erst beim zweiten Tag. That only happens, the problem becomes on the second day. Then you see that the bulls of Sukkot keep on going lower. That takes place on the second day Yontif. But this is very difficult, because Rashi is not commenting in the pasuk where it says that on the second day you brought 12, which was one less than the first day of Sukkot. Rashi puts it after the pasuk finishes saying how much karbonos there was on the second day. Then the pasuk starts talking about the libation, and then when Rashi starts talking about why is it the Purim are less over there, why would Rashi not comment in the pasuk before, when the first time the number is mentioned in this pasuk, when it talks about the libation that comes with the animals, with the different korbanos, there's no mention of a number of there at all. As is ober tomua beyoser. This is very surprising. Der inyan von poichasim v'hilchim. This idea that they're going and being less, keep on going less, zetmen gleich. You see this immediately in the ersten pasuk von the korbanos shel yom hasheni. In the first verse, when it starts talking about the offerings of the second day of Sukkot, pasuk says, Ubayoim hasheni porim v'goymer shneim also. 12, which is 12, which compared to the one that we brought on the first day was 13. Mit einem weniger v'bayoim harishon, one less than the first day. So that's where it's first shown that these porim are being diminished. Hein farvos vart op Rashi mit sein pirush bizn posik shel achrizeh. So how come Rashi waits with his commentary to the second pasuk in Yom Hasheni? Chosom v'niskayim laporim, the mincha, the meal offering, and the libations for the bulls. Then Rashi all of a sudden explains how come the number is diminished. And in this pasuk, it doesn't even mention a number altogether. It just says laporim and the bulls, whatever the previous pasuk. Why would Rashi bring it here? That to me, them is not gresser. The surprise is even greater. In them pasuk, ver gor nit der mon dem mispar haporim. In this verse, it's not mentioned at all the number of the bulls. So what's going on over here? And the Rebbe will learn something totally different. Why we are bringing it down. The Rebbe is going to explain that it's actually connected to this specific pasuk is what's problematic from Rashi, not the way it would seem on the surface that Rashi's issue is why is there a change in the number of the korbanos, as we'll see later on. Then the Rebbe wants to also understand how is this two things fit together. On one hand, we say the korbanos are a sign of destruction. They're diminished, and then we say it protects them. Also, in Rashi's commentary itself, it's surprising. He seems like he's contradicting himself within his commentary. He begins his commentary by saying, Ados was the Poreachag seinen Keneged the Shibim Umeis. That they correspond to the 70 nations. So he says, in Izinan Oifun Fun Mismati Ba'ilchim. How come the number 70 is represented by 13, 12, 11 going down for the 7 days, which come to the total of 70? Izinan Oifun Fun Mismati Ba'ilchim. So it's represented in a way in which they keep on diminishing and going. Conceivably, the Rebbe doesn't say this here, but conceivably could have gone the other way. He could have started with the lower and keep on going till you get to the 70 over the 7 days to reverse the numbers. But yet the Torah puts it this way because this corresponds to the nations of the world which keep on going down. Simen Kloya, that's a sign for destruction. Kloya lahem, that they will be destroyed. Is gleich mamshich lahepach, but then Rashi immediately continues just the opposite. As bimei hamigdosh, that during the days of the Migdosh, haben die Karbonis nit nor nit gebracht zeir kloyas. Kloya, not only did these Karbonis not bring them destruction, but the opposite, not adarabe. Rashi says they will protect them. So here we're saying that this is a sign of destruction. That's why the Karbanos are less, and then we're saying it's protecting them. Well, maybe there's two parts in the Karbanos. The number represents Kloya because it keeps on going down. But the Karban itself is a protection. Even though one can say, as the zwei verkehrte Peules, the two opposite impacts, seine verbunden mit besonderen Inyonim, they are two separate matters within the Korbanos. The simen kloya lahem, the sign for the destruction for the nations, is blois mitzad dem misparhab, Purim. That's only the number represents 1312 going down. That's Siman Kloilan. Over the Akrovis Korbanis, but the offering of the Korbanis, that accomplished a protection for the nations, is over noch Alstamu, but it's still surprising. This is still difficult to understand. Number one, Aleph. Lemai nafkamina do in Pirush HaPosik. So why different does it make in this Posik? Azubi meha mikdash hoyu meginim aleim chulu, that they would protect them in the days of the Beis HaMikdash. We're just trying to say the kloya, the number. So who cares? Why is it important over here to talk about what took place in the time of the Beis HaMikdash, that it would protect them? Beis beikar, and mainly the Rebbe says, it's still a contradiction. It can zayin. How could it be at the Zelba Korbonis that the same sacrifices on Hoben, that they should have contradictory acts of a Siman Kloya, of destruction, also protection? The Rebbe is trying, and to prove his point, his pirush, as the Rebbe is going to say soon, what really bothering Rashi, and what Rashi is coming to explain over here, that number one, we can't say that it's just as simple as that. Why were the korbanos less every day? If that's Rashi's problem and Rashi's answer, because it represents the goyim, why didn't Rashi say this on the first pasuk in the second korbanos, where it talks about, where he mentions that the korbanos of the second day were 12 porim, which was one less than the day before. And besides that, the Rebbe says, what does Rashi mean over here if the in the pirush, which would also help the Rebbe for his other pirush? What does it mean that it also protects them, but it also is a destruction for them? How could this be? And we'll see later on how everything fits in so beautifully. But before we do that, the Rebbe has a few more questions, 5 questions on the language of Rashi, trying to understand exactly Rashi's wording over here. There's also many questions in the language of Rashi, and the Rebbe is going to mention 5 of them. Man. Aleph, number 1. Since Rashi is intention, as we're learning the Pashtus, why the bulls of the sukkahs keep on going less, 13:12, less. This is Rashi's issue. So Rashi should have addressed this issue first. Before saying that there's the 70, the total number of 70, that's not the issue we're addressing right now. Right now, first thing we want to know, why is it less? It's less because it keeps on going, because it goes correspond to the nations of the world. How do we know that? Then Rashi should say, because the total number is 70, and there's 70 nations of the world. Not starting first by saying that there are 70 nations of the world. That's not the total number. That's nothing. That's not connected to the going lower or higher or things like that. Let's see. Since Rashi is coming to answer, how come the bulls of Sukkot keep on going less? So he should have started in this Rashi, his commentary, to say like this: Leporim is saying that this corresponds to the nation, that they keep on going less, which is the sign of destruction, because that's Rashi's issue. Why is going less? Is because it corresponds to the goyim. And then later on, after saying that, he has to base to support this interpretation with a proof. Who says it's going to the nations of the world? Lochein misporim shivim keneged shivim umis, and that's why the number is 70, because it corresponds to the 70 nations. But Rashi goes in the reverse order. Favos Haupton Rashi Rashi starts off at 70, corresponds to the 70 nations from the Pori. And only afterwards they keep on diminishing. The problem was why they keep diminishing and why they keep on a lesser number in the second. But Rashi starts first saying the 70 corresponds to the 70, and then Rashi says about Mismatim V'Hilchim. Nochmer. Compare this to the next Rashi, where Rashi explains V'Lakvosim that it corresponds to the Yidden. Rashi doesn't start there with a number, that there was 98 Kvosim total on the 7th day. Rashi doesn't start that. Rashi starts first. Haupton noch wenn dem Hamshach Pirush Oivel Kvosim. Haupton Take Rashi sein Pirush. So Rashi starts his commentary, and he says, Keneged Yisrael, it corresponds to the Yidden, and every day they bought the same number of sheep. V'hem Kvuyim, those are set, unlike the Porim that changed the number. God bless, they were Kvuyim set. Nid v'depore achag was Pinchas v'Hilchim, unlike the bulls of Sukkot, which kept on going less. Und erst noch, after Rashi says that all the numbers are the same as opposed to the Purim, which keep on going lower, right? Erst noch is a mavayir, uminyonim tzadik ches chulu, and there's a 98. If you total up the 7 days of the sheep, you have 98, because they are to protect the Yidden from the kololas, the 98 clothes. The order in Rashi says also, tells us that that's not what Rashi is coming to answer. There's a different issue that Rashi has, as we'll see. Base. What is the Arichas Haloshin in the Rashi? What does Rashi have writing in such a lengthy way? Shemismatim v'holchim simon kloya lahem. He adds, it's a sign for destruction to them. What would be if Rashi would have just left it with shemismatim v'holchim? What is the addition simon kloya lahem? Well, given genug, it would seem that it would have been sufficient when Rashi zogt keneged shivim umois. Shemismatim v'holchim corresponds to the 70 nations that are mismatim v'holchim, instead of saying also that it's a sign of kloya. V'al derech v'der loshim v'os Rashi alein nutz b'pirush frier, similar to the language which Rashi himself uses earlier in the pasuk by bris bein habesorim, by the covenant between the pieces that Hashem made with Abraham. Over there, Rashi says the fikoch ramas ala umas sheikolim v'holchim. And that is why over there he cut the animals, because that represents the nations which will be kolim v'holchim. It doesn't say Simon like Rashi Simon Kloy Lahem, kolim v'holchim, that they keep on going diminished. Gimel. Number 3, Iker Choser min HaSefer. In the Rashi, seems like the main thing, Rashi says that it's protecting them, that the korbanos are protecting them. What protects them? The korbanos is the offering, but Rashi doesn't use the word the offering of the korbanos. So the main is lacking from what Rashi is saying. Megan is of the akrovas haporim. What is protecting them is the offering of the bulls. But Rashi get up talking about akrovas haporim meginele. And the offering of the korbanos protects them. And Rashi doesn't say about that akrovas haporim. Then What is Rashi's language? Dalet, was is der Zogen, ubimei hamigdash meginim aleim, that during the days of the Mikdash it would protect them. Of course, that's when the Karbonas were brought. In Golus, we don't have any Karbonas. Why is Rashi to say that? See, then, volt men gemeint, would you then have thought as the Akrove, ubemele the Hakona from the Karbonas of Zman HaGolus, would you ever think that the offering and the protection of the Karbonas is in time of Golus? And hey, Rashi in Gemara zogt, Rashi the Gemara says, as the Shivim Pore Achag, Shekaneged Shivim Umes, that the 70 bulls that were brought on the Sukkahs to correspond to the 70 nations, Zayin Lechapir Aleihem, to atone for them, Sheyerdu Gesholim B'chol Oilam, that the whole world shall have rain. It atones for them so that the rain should come down. Because on Yom Tov Sukkahs, they are judged for water. So they too get protected because of the korbanos that they bring. Pavozok Rashi beperushe al hatoira anandar inyan v'sug bepeulas hakorbanos. Why does Rashi, in his commentary on the Torah, tell us a different idea and a different category what the korbanos accomplish? How you meginim aleim and you sort of protect them from the pains, versus saying you protected for them that the rain should come down to atone for their sins. All of these questions that the Rebbe has in the language of Rashi, all of these will be smoothed out and very clearly understood once we'll understand, as the Rebbe will lay down the explanation, what Rashi is really coming to tell us over here. The Rebbe basically says, this is not a question why the korbanos are less every day, because it's very possible that every day has its own significance of korbanos, and the number means something else, and they have a different hint, and doesn't mean that they are somehow that they're connected. Each day has its own korbanos, its own meaning. It proves from different places, like by the korbanos of the Nisim. And even though they brought the same korbanos, or by the Bris Ben Absorim, so just the fact that one korban is less than the other, that doesn't prove anything. But the key that the Rebbe says, what's bothering Rashi, is in the second pasuk, because the second pasuk specifically says that the minchosom v'niskeyim, the meal offering and the libations that came along with the korbanos, it says over there kamishpat, it was done like the first day. Basically, the pasuk is telling us it's not separate. Why doesn't the Torah enumerate what if each korban meant something else? It's not a unified one idea here. So why would the Torah not repeat, as in other places, for each korban their separate libation? So it means that the Torah, that's why Rashi brings it down over here. That means that the Torah wants to see that this is all one. This is one. What is the one thing about? That's the Shivim Porechag. Let's see inside. The Rebbe explained it. Dalet. So we can say, what's the explanation of all this? The etzem zach farvos pore hachag zayin and Pinchas ibohelach. The fact alone that the bulls of Sukkot keep on diminishing, both the limud al derech hapshat can grace kashi given. When you learn, when you study and you learn in the literal level of the pasuk, that would not be such a difficulty. Wouldn't be such a big deal. Why? Because it makes sense. Even a 5-year-old who learns the chumash is faran in yet mispar shel korbanos agaviser remes. In every number how much korbanos, there is some sort of a hint what it points to. As you already learned, freer in their sipur from bris bein abesorim, in the covenant by Avram, it says egla mishulashes goimer. So what is the egla mishulashes? So Rashi already says over there Rashi explained over there that there were three agolim, remes l'shloisha porim, par yom kippurim, par helam dover, egla rufa. So there is significance for every number. Derech zein parshas nosei, we learn the parshas nosei by the korbanos hanisim, by the offerings of the nisim. As the ramozim bashtimen the tzol und das gleich von the korbanos, that these hints they determine the number and similar. Not only the numbers, the other details of the gifts that they brought from the karbonis. So it's not a problem why a certain number is brought, because there's different significance, there's different rimos. So that wouldn't be a problem for the learning in Pshat. So similar in our case, one could say, as yet talk for Sukkot is do an inyan that on every day in Sukkot there is a certain matter, which is verbunden mit dem betreffenden Mispar Davke von die Porim, which is associated with exactly that number of bulls. The number of bulls corresponds to that specific day. First day Yom Tov, second day, every day. Rashi darf nicht sagen in was es besteht in der Rimozim. Rashi would not need to tell us what the hints are. But das gehört nicht zum Limud al derech hapshat. That does not belong when we learn the pshat, what the exact significance of numbers are. Nor zum Limud al derech haremes vadrush. This is when you're learning by way of hint and by way of drush, expounding, then you also go into the numbers, the details. Which means like this. The Ben Chomesh Lemikra vase, the Ben Chomesh Lemikra knows, as in Torah is Farah, that in Torah exists, Nitnor Pshat. There's more than just a simple meaning. He knows there is a hint and expounding. Was the Farved by im nitzayin king kasha. That's why he won't have a problem, he won't have a difficulty. From them shinu yemispar aporim, there's a change in the number of the bulls. Because aber mit him, he knows mit him let them blows them limits from pshat. We're only teaching him, the child, he knows the pshat. Sideness is the ashverikait the pshat. The exception is sometimes there is a difficulty in the pshat. Was vert verantwortlich blows when man weiß dem remes, only answered when we know the remes. So that's why Rashi will sometimes bring down the remes, because there is a difficulty in the pshat. So that's not an issue. What is Rashi's issue? Rashi's issue is that when we get to the second pasuk, all of a sudden it seems to tell us that's not a separate idea the second day, but actually we're combining it and connecting it to the first, and the same thing for all days. Nor b'shas and kum zum pasuk. When you come to the verse, that the libations and the meal offerings and the libation for the bull was kamishpat, was as the rule. As we said before, dover nit verstandig. Over here we get a difficulty. We don't understand. If the sacrifice of every day of Sukkot have separate, different types of hints, that means as they zayin and biramozi that the way they are in the hint and in the intent of these ideas, farshidin karbonis, they are different karbonis. Therefore, how the pasuk gedarft oisrechen, and the pasuk should have enumerated jeden tog alle protim sheba karbonis. It should have told us every day all the detail of the karbonis. Oich die was haben demselben Zoll in the Friedrich Tag. Also, those that have the same number as the previous day should have mentioned and enumerated the details of each one of these karbonis. Wie man hat gelernt früher, and as we learned earlier, by the Karbonis Hanisim. If they're different Karbonis, so we should have all the libation also detailed. As we learned earlier by the Karbonis Hanisim, by the offerings of the Nisim, Torah keeps on repeating all the time. The same, even though it was identical. As Afal Pias Yeden Nosiot Gebracht the Zelbetzol Karbonis, the other Nisim. Although that every one of the leaders of the tribes brought the same amount of sacrifices, just as the other leaders from the other tribes, and yet the Torah enumerates each one. Vibald as kol echad ve'echad. Everybody brought it according to their understanding. Each leader had different intentions, different hints. They were identical. The number, the physical manifestation was the same, but the ideas were different for each korban, for each nasi. This is to gepas parzain shevet. That should fit for their tribe. So rechont ois the Torah by yet nasi bazunder. The Torah enumerates by every tribe separately 12 more. Torah 12 times repeats the alle prote hakorbanis, all the details of the sacrifices. Boy, Torah does not satisfy itself to say, oh, and so brought the tribe, the next leader of the tribe, and so brought, it doesn't say, goes through all the details. But in our case, the Torah by yet talk bazunder the menachos. The Torah does not repeat every day separately the offerings, the meal offerings, the libations that came with the korban. Prota korban, the details of the korban. Not adrab. On the contrary, the posik is madgish uminchosom v'niskeim goimer misporon kamishpat. But the libations and the minchas were like the mishpat. Mishpat, which means like the law as mentioned the first day. As those is in them zelbun mishpat, says the same rule with the karbonis for the ersten tag as the sacrifices of the first day. Thus haste, which means nit noris don nit mutgesh with the karbonis for jeden tag. Seinen verschiedene karbonis. Not only is it not emphasized how each one of these sacrifices are different karbonis, nor verkehrt. That posik connects them is madgish as a zainen der selber inyan. It's the same idea. It's something that is repeated every day. Kamishpot. It's the same from Ershon Tog. The posik says there is no difference, and the Torah adds to Kamishpot that it is like the first day. By Rashi, so Rashi has a problem. The difficulty arises by Rashi. Since they are really one matter, they're not different korbanos, they're hinting for different things. So how come they keep on going less? If they were their own korbanos separately, okay. But here you're saying that they're the same. It's kamishpat. So why is there a different number? If you're already going to change it higher. Well, there should be in a way of a blessing. To add elevation, but not destruction later, losing out. It's Rashi's issue. And the Rebbe says, if you look at the pasuk together, it's almost a paradox in the pasuk. On one hand, there is a change, and on the other hand, we say kamishpat. So Is it different? Is it a change? They're not the same. And then you say, no, it's just like the first day. It's an item and just the opposite. Von dem was yet dog is a shinui. The fact that every day there's a change. Miyut, you're diminishing in the number of sacrifices that we see as is eine verschieden. You see that they're different. Mit andere Remozim, that are supposed to be different hints. Und gleich noch is the Pasuk Madgish, and immediately following that, the Pasuk emphasizes the Karbonis Chag and in ein Inyan, that the Karbonis of the Yom Tov are really one idea, ein Mishpat. Brilliant what Rashi answers here, where Rabbi explains. The numbers in total, while they may look different numbers every day, but we're talking about a total number of 70 over here. So we're not talking about different. We're talking about taka the same, because to add them up and to correspond to goyim, but it's 70. It's one idea, but it's 70, and the reason it's diminished is because we're talking about goyim. That's why it's not going up a number and going down a number, but it's really one, just like all the karbonis, the other karbonis are really one over here too, even though the numbers change. But the numbers, we're not to look at the numbers individually. We're looking at the total number 70. Then, and for Rashi, that's what Rashi answers. Pore achag shivim heim keneged shivim umes so'el umes shemismati belchim. The bulls of the Yom Tov are 70 to correspond to the 70 nations that are keep on being diminished. The karbones achag zainen take ein inyan mishpat. The offerings of the Chag are taka, are really one idea. There's one law. Same. Or b'negeya de porei achag, remez lumis, as far as the bulls that you brought on Sukkot, which hint for the nations. Drikt sich ois der inyan. How does it express this one inyan in the mispar hakoilel von alle yemei achag, in the number, the added number when you add all the days of the Chag. Porei HaChag shivim heim keneged shivim umis. The total number, 70 to correspond to the 70 nations. The Porim von alle sieben Tag, the bulls of all the 7 days, stellen zusammen ein Inyan. They combine, there's one idea here, 70. The 70 is made up from the different numbers. That's all Mishpat. Shivim Umais, we're talking about 70 nations. Und das Gufa is der Tam, that itself is the reason. Cause is corresponding to one, to the nations of the world. And that's why we have to do it that keep on being diminished. And Rashi is now, as the Rebbe explained, trying to modify and qualify what he means when he says Peichasim Bahulch. We're not meaning literally over here that the Goyim are being destroyed. It is just a description who the nations are. Nations will eventually, they are mismatim v'halchim. That's not related to this. The impact of the Karbonos HaChag is a protection for them. Why would Karbonos be something negative? We know Karbonos are always positive. And Chomesh Lemikra doesn't know it's negative. So why would this mismat Rashi modifies and qualifies and said it's only the siman koloy that we're talking about a nation, a category which is going to be diminished. But here it's actually protecting them. By Menchomish Lemikra is aber nicht verstandig. Hey, Menchomish doesn't understand. Machayin gelernt beribu mikoimis in Chumash. When Korbanes, we learned already in many places in the Chumash about Korbanes, Alalei Korbanes, all types of Korbanes, un umetun tun oif Korbanes adover toif. Everywhere Korbanes accomplish something good. Slicha v'kapora, forgiving, atonement, reich nechoyech v'Hashem, a pleasant aroma, Hashem v'kiyotzim. Wie kommt es? How come, as the Pe'ula from Porei HaChag, that this impact of the Porei HaChag soll sein an Inyan von Kloya, Mismati v'Hilchim, that it's the diminishing, that it's a level of destruction going down. If them is Rashi Mesigum be Rashi therefore adds explanation. Simen Kloya Lahem. This is just a sign of destruction. But in time of the Mikdash, it was protecting them. Those was the Porei HaChag Zainen Kineget Shivim Umis Shemismati V'Hilchim. The fact that the Porei HaChag correspond to the nations of the world, the 70 nations, who are diminished and keep on going down, 13, 12, the numbers go down, the Purim, meint nit as this is the Pe'ula from them Korban. This doesn't mean that this is what the Korban accomplishes. It's only a sign of their Kloya, of the destruction. As his blows as Simon, this is only a sign, as the Korbanos, that these sacrifices are connected, as Zelcha, they correspond to such was they will safe nichlever, and then they will be destroyed. But in the base of Mikdash, they would protect them. The Korbanos did positive. The Pe'ula for the Korbanos, but this is B'mei HaMikdash, the Pe'ula, which is in the days of the Mikdash, is verkehrt. It's just the opposite. To oifton hagona, it is to accomplish a protection. And it's not just the Korban, the Akrovas HaKorban, but during the time of the Mikdash, till the next Korban. That's why it says B'mei HaMikdash. It's not, Rabbi said the Akrovas HaKorban. But the Yimei HaMikdash means during the whole period of the Beis HaMikdash, the Pe'ula, from the Hakrove, the impact of the sacrifice of the Korban is doch given nit nor bisman Hakrove, was not just at the time that they offered it, nor bisman Hakrove bo, till the time of the next offering. B'mei HaMikdash, during the days of the Mikdash, in the days of the Mikdash, it lasted for the entire time, the protection during time Beis HaMikdash. Und der Tam ad Goshe B'mei HaMikdash. Why does the emphasize that during the days of the Mikdash? Well, the mit vet klor, that makes it clear. As davke der inyan, because Mikdash with the Korbanos, it's only this inyan of Maginim Alehem is verbunden mit Pulas Korbanos. Only that is not the other thing. B'mei HaMikdash. Mash'enke, that is connected to the Mikdash, the protection. Mash'enke der Simon Kloy Lahem, which state farther in Rashi, but the sign for the destruction, which Rashi says before, is a Simon v'chis verbunden mit the Umis in Algemein. That's just a sign which is related, connected to the nations. Nations in general are going to be diminished, but it's nothing to do with the Korbanos. So therefore Rashi says, B'mei HaMikdash, to emphasize that the protection of B'mei HaMikdash, nit mit Yemei HaMikdash, that's not associated the Kloy to the B'mei HaMikdash, because we're not talking, this is not from the Korbanos. That's just describing nations of the world. That's why it is Mismatim V'Elch. So it turns out that we have one thing over here, that there's 70 nations. That's the total kamishpah, the one thing protecting the 70 nations. And the other thing, which is a protection for all the nations, 70, the total number. And then the reason why they come less is because it so happened that these people, the Umas Olam, are going to be diminished. So that's why it's represented by every day. One thing is the total number, the 70. And then the way we get to the 70 is that it keeps down going lower. But these are two separate parts. Why does Rashi bunch them up together? The first Rashi, partner Rashi, is Keneged Shivim. That answers the question that the Rebbe says, that the Ben Chamish, the Mikra says, how come? It's all one, the Kamishpat. So this is 70 is one. And then Rashi continues, but why would there be diminishing a kloya over here? So Rashi says it doesn't mean kloya, but it just represents the nation. But why does Rashi combine it then? Is not pulas hakorban. This is not the act. This does not the come. That's just a sign who we're talking about. It's only the sign of kloya lahem, which tells us that we're talking about it. The two aspects of the bulls, which correspond to the umas. So you have one thing is the mispar hakoil shivim, 70 nations. So there's 70 bulls altogether. And based the hakrovin and oifim from mismatim, then you have another idea that the fact that they were brought in a way that they got lower, and it's for a different reason, is because the nation will be clear, there's no connection, but that's not part of what the korban does. But Rashi so Rashi seemingly should have separated them, saying ayin keneged ayin umas, as Rashi starts off. That is the 70. At zweiter inyan, at the Ramaschal, second subject, or another Rashi, that really diminishes simkloya. Oich is not glatik. Also, it's not smooth. Why was it necessary to connect the Purim with Umas? We needed two. One that it's 70, and then that they're going down. So while the Rebbe said before that that's not part of the korban mismatin v'hilchim, we have to say that there's some connection. Musman zogit. So we need to say, as al pi as the linyan from mismatin v'hilchim is blois siman kloya lahem, that it's not accomplishment of the korban, but it's just a sign of kloya lahem. Is thus aber negeya to their pu'ulas hakorban. It still is connected to the act of the korban. On the riber, that's what Rashi doesn't learn like the Gemara, but he explains Mina Yisurim. But the riber is Rashi medayik, or Yemeginim Aleim Mina Yisurim, that it protected them from the pains. Unit stam lechaper Aleim kedei zalahom brachos gesham. Rashi doesn't say like the Gemara says to atone for them, so they have blessing gesham. Those kufes given pulas hakor. That itself was of the impact of the korban. As nit kukendig was der Eibishter hot melechat chile gemach the umis. Notwithstanding that the Eibishter to beginning made the nations in an oifer in a way, as his own zaym is mati v'hilchim, that they should be diminished, keep on being diminished, is over be may hamigdosh, but in the days of the migdosh, when Eden hamakri and poreachak, when the Yidden brought the bulls for Yom Tov, Ubedavka Ayin I know said specifically 70 to correspond to the 70 nations, is alle Ayin Porim. So all of the 70 Porim, or you Maginim Aleihem Mina Yisurim. They would protect them from pains. The Porei Achag of making them of the Umis, they protected the nations. As by Zeis al Demot Nizayin Keninyan from Ismatim Behulchim, there should not be diminished them. Afilu nit amismatim from Yisurim, even not diminishing through pain. So at that point during Yom Tov, that stopped it as well. So while it's generally they're mismati ba'olchim, but the impact of the karbonis did protect them from Yisurim, so they're not mismati. Zayin. Apikol anal, v'toich mer verstandig der Hemshech and Rashi, understand the continuation in Rashi. He explains like Kvosim, who connected Israel. This corresponds to the Yidden. Shenikru sepizura. They are referred to as a scattered sheep. They kvui, but they're set. Rashi says, Uminyonam tzadik ches. The number is 98. To take away from them, to end from them the 98 curses that are Mishnah Torah. The L'chayre is Nitmuma. Seemingly, it's not understood. Why this whole lengthy Rashi? Now, the Rebbe is going to bring a few questions in this Rashi, and according to the Rebbe's explanation in the previous Rashi, this will all be answered. This that Rashi says in opening, that this lakvosim corresponds to the Yidden, and it gets the same amount as every day because that set doesn't change, is those the umas from the Porei Achag. So this is the opposite of the Porei Achag. The goyim are diminished and the Yidden are set. They correspond with that. And this set, but why is it important? How does it connect in the simple meaning of the pasuk? Why do we need to look for the numbers 98? The number 70 was to tell us that we're talking about goyim. But 98 for the klolos, why do we need that? Meila, the mispur from Porei Achag. We understand the number of the bulls of the Chag is arayas, is eine keneged, the shivim umes. That proves that the Purim correspond to the nations. But what does it add, this hint, in Minyonim Tzadik Ches, that the number is 98? In them, as the Kvosim Zane Keneged Yisrael, that they're corresponding to the Yidden. Doesn't prove 98 that it corresponds to the Yidden. It just tells us something other hint, that that's against to protect them from the 98 curses. Nor debir in them. But the Rebbe's explanation is, the bald as the Shivim Purim design Yimei Achag, sign in Enklau, since the 70 bulls of the 7 days of Sukkot are really 1/70th number, even though every day had 13, 12, 11, but it's the 70. Is Mustaber Suzogun, so it's also logically to say, as Eich di Karbones Achag vel Chazayin connected Israel, that also the Karbones of the Yom Tov, which correspond to the Yidden, stellen zusammen in Indian, that also combines one matter. Since you offer them at one continuation, you offer the bulls and then you offer the sheep, so then it makes sense to say As beide suge korbanos haben an ähnliche Pula, that both of these categories of korbanos have a similar impact what they accomplish. Zokt Rashi, that's what Rashi says. Uminyonom tzadik ches, the number is 98. The chalis mem tzadik ches klolus of Mishnah Torah, to destroy and take away from them the 98 curses that we find in Mishnah Torah, the Parshas Kisomim. Emes take as kivosim keneged Yisrael. Beim kivuyim, it is true that the sheep correspond to the Yidden and they're set, so it looks like they're all set. Yidden zayne nit bismatim v'echem chas v'sholom, they are not diminished, they keep on diminished, God forbid, nor kvuyim, kayomim la'olam, they are set forever. Aber das is noch nit shoylel as so by zeh zayin Yisurim Nachman Islam. This does not negate and assure that it's not going to be paid. It can be Kayamim Lo'ilom with Yisurim. Of them kumen the kvosim untuan oif. So here the sheep come and they accomplish lechalis, the dugma siman kloya from the porim, similar to the siman kloya from the porim at the umasoilom. Over there, it's the destruction, but here is to destroy the klolos, not the tova, but for the good. Mayhem. The wonder word, the beginning of the parenthesis, probably before the word number the teva. Comes to from the porim, mehem tzadik ches klolos, to take away the 98 klolos. As neat, nor the answer of the mitzias from the Eden bleibt ganz, not just that the existence, the existence of the Eden remains whole. Das is in an oifum for menucha v'shalva yisurim, but it's in a way of relaxed and peace without any pain. Okay, now the Rebbe is going to bring in now another issue. Why Rashi chooses to say that kvosim correspond to the Yidden and not Elim. The whole big arichis now the Rebbe is going to explain, because we find that the Yidden are compared to Elim too. And the Elim Moshe Rabbeinu, as we'll see. Ches. But darf noch aber verstehen, we need to understand, the Posuk steht doch la porim, lo Elim, v'la kvosim. But was learned Rashi, why does Rashi learn of the la kvosim? Is Keneged Yisrael, that kvosim corresponds to the Yidden, or nit la Elim, was steht früher in Posuk, which says before in the Posuk. Why does he translate the kvosim, not the Elim? We can it far answer. Ados is the far. He can't answer the reason for this. Because Yidden werden angerufen se, aber nicht Elim, because Yidden are referred to as a sheep, but not Elim. They're not called Elim. How could we say that the Elim corresponds to them? Rashi hat schon früher mefarish given in Parshas Lech Lecha, as umeslim shelo Elim, that the nations were compared to rams, to Elim. How could we compare Yidden to Elim? But that's not a good answer. By Aleph, if par echad ayel echad, which we're going to learn in the Shmini Atzeres on the 8th day, or stayed by Shmini Atzeres, par echad, is Rashi mefarish Elu keneged Yisrael. Par echad ayel echad correspond to a Yid. Said men as euch par vayil kennen sein keneged Yisrael. Even though here is Purim, we say keneged Umis, but the par echad ayel echad says correspond to Yid. Zet men as euch par vayil kennen sein keneged Yisrael. B'tzad zeir mispor ukayetze boy In other words, because a par is a one, ayil is one, yid are one next to the 70 nations. So that's what par ayil mean yid. Not so much the par what, but an our pasuk is not one. How are we going to compare this to a yid? But it's not one. If it was one par, one ayil. But Rabbi Rashi, he can give him a remez a koilel of the Eilim the Chag HaSukkos. Rashi could have found a inclusive of the uninclusive number, the Eilim the Chag HaSukkos, which total every day there was two, and there was two together would be 14. Was a Tashai that relates to Yid could have found something. So we could have compared Eilim. Even if you're going to push and say, we don't have a fitting hint in the style of Pshat. If the Yudal Elim, 14 Elim, we can't compare them to the Yid. And the farm Muslims the Kavosim Zane Keneged Yisrael. That's why we have to say the sheep are correspond to the Yidden, because over there we have 98, and the 98 fits. Glatik in Pasik. We still have a problem in the verse. Halamai is the Torah mafsik. Why is the Torah interrupt Svishan the Purim, which is Keneged Umeis, Unkavasim Keneged Yisrael Metelim? Why does it interrupt in between the Purim and the Eli and the Kavasim, which are Yidden with the Eli? Das verstehen. Unbelievable insight over here. But das verstehen behagdim was Rashi is mefarish. Understand this by introducing Rashi explains at the Purim Zainen Keneged Umis. Rashi says the bulls correspond to the nation. Lois mitzad the mispor hakoidel d'shivim. I said because there's 70 nations. That's why Purim correspond to Umis. L'cheira, besides the fact the number, a bull itself represents the goy. Rashi is mefarish in Parshas Lach L'cha. Parshas Lach. As Umis nimshulu lePurim, that the nations are compared to bulls. Shenemar Svavuni, Purim Rabim, I've been surrounded by many Purim, which is the nation of the world. What does it bring it down? By the bulls of the Yom Tov, that the nations of the world are compared because they're Purim. That to me is Nochrasa. We have even a greater surprise. When they get to Kvosim, Zokt Rashi Atam, the Rashi gives a reason by the sheep as their min Kvosim Gufa is Aremes Evit. Rashi says that the Kvosim itself, not the number, but the Kvosim is a hint, Sep Zura. It shows on a Yid that sheep represents a Yid, is a hint of a Yid. But the Rashi Abad Gidav Zog Natam, so Rashi for sure should have said a reason by Shaykhs from the min Purim to Umas Olam. Why are they compared a par? Not just because of the amount of Purim that were brought, but the par itself, a bull, represents Svavuni Purim Rabim. The bull is the nations of the world. So Tess, the Shleimer B'zeh, the Bir B'zeh called Purim Aderech Haremes. I was going to say the explanation, at least in the way of a hint. By the Karbonis from Chaga Pesach, by the Pesach, we were talking about the Sukkot Karbonis. By the Pesach Karbonis, is Rashi Mefarish, Purim Keneged Avraham, Elim is Keneged Eli Shel Yitzchok, and Kvosim Keneged Yaakov. By Yaakov, we find the Kvosim Hifrid, the Atzmei, by the Elim is the Eli Shel Yitzchok. Go back for a second. There's a misstart on that recording. So just go back here because I think we missed a piece of the recording on the video. Um, so how come Rashi says va'ayelosh yochid kemen zogun? So we can say as der mit macht Rashi klor, that Rashi clarifies as oder pirush batzitzich, nit nor zu dem posik when he says over here that it goes keneged Yitzchok. He isn't talking just about here; he's talking about all the elim. So the posik nor to alle korbanos musaf yontev. We're talking about all korbanos musaf yontev from porim elim ukvosim, wherever the posik talks about elim. Wherever the pasuk talks about elim kvosim, the porim elim kvosim, all of the psukim always correspond to Avram, Yitzchak, and Keneged the Gimel Ovis. They always correspond to the three forefathers to Avram, Yitzchak, Yaakov. Und der Fahr can Rashi nit zogen as the Porei Chag and Keneged the Umis, while Umis nimshul leporim. Rashi cannot say the Porei Chag correspond to the nations because the nations have been compared to the Porim. Well, Adarabah, because on the contrary, the mean Porim do, as Rashi stated by Pesach, is a remes of Avram. It's a hint of Avram. So his norvos der mispara Porim zane keneged shigmumis. It's only that the number of the Porim correspond to the 70 nations. Usi is kein stirenit as the Porim seinen Seike neged Avram und Seike neged the Shivim Umes. It's not a contradiction that these bulls are both correspond to Avram and they also correspond to the 70 nations. But like Avram and state Avam and Goim Nesaticha, that I've given you, placed you as the father of all the nations. Is men bechaga sukkahs makriv the porim keneged the umes. So on sukkahs we are makriv the porim corresponding to umes. The number 70 was Avram is in zaticha to say love. Avram has been their father. So being the por corresponding to Avram isn't a contradiction. On the contrary, he's the Avram goyim saticha. So that's the 70 nations that come from Avram. Al derech zeh benegeit zu kvosim. Similarly, as it relates to the sheep, Ados was they zainen keneged Yisrael. This that they are corresponding to the Yidden is oile bekone echad midem was they zainen keneged Yaakov. That fits and it goes together that they're keneged Yaakov, and that's why. It's the sheep. Baldavki Yaakov is Mitos Shlema, as Rashi said, and the sheep correspond to Yaakov. Yaakov is Mitos Shlema from Imzan Narois Bloish Yisrael. Only Yidden came out from him. So the sheep, which correspond to Yaakov, was Kvos Mifrid Yaakov, that makes sense for this, specifically for the Yidden. Mash'eki Yitzchok was Yotzim and Esav. Yitzchok had Esav as well. So we'd rather connected to Kvosim, but not to the Elim. So based on that, we'll also explain Nit nor farvos der posik is mafsik mit Elim. Not only why the verse interrupts with the Elim. Because they correspond to Yitzchok, nor euch dem tam hashinui, but also the reason for the change was davke by Karbonis Achag, that specifically when it came to the Yom Tov Karbonis of Sukkot, hat man gebracht Elim Shnaim, they brought two Elim. Nit vi bishara Yomim Tevim, was man bringt Ayel Echad, which they bring only one Ayel. Vibald as the Kvosim, Adiporim Ukvosim, Zainen nit keneged Avram v'Yakov Kshalatzma, since they don't represent Avram Yika on their own, nor b'shayches to deep from them as design and ovis, but as they relate to those who they are fathers to, fathers Avoyna Hamoin Goyim, or to the Yidden Shivim Umisumne Israel, is verstandig. It's understood as Aderech Zeis Benegeya to the Elim Keneged Yitzchok. Similarly, is as it connects to the Elim which correspond to Yitzchok. And the Far bringt man Elim Shnayim. That's why there's two. Keneged the Tzvei Zin for Yitzchok Yaakov Esau. It's all about the children here. 70, the nations, the Yidden, connected to Yaakov, and to Yitzchak, two Elim, Yitzchak and Yaakov, Esau. And this is the Seder HaKarbanos. This is the order. 3 years come the Purim Keneged Shivim Umes. First come the Purim correspond to the 70 nations. The Besoif come the Kvosim, in the end come the Kvosim Keneged Yisrael to correspond to the Yidden. And also an intermediary, the Elim Shnoim, the two Elim Keneged Esau, Umes and Yaakov Yisrael, corresponding the two, both Esau and Yaakov, which is the middle, which is the Elim Shnoim. The high time sucht nit Rashi ken remes if the mispar hakoilel shel ha'elim. That's the reason also Rashi doesn't look for a number. Why the number 14? But the Elim zayne nit an inyan la'atzmam, because they're not something by themselves to need a number. They are just merely an intermediary from the Purim and the Kavosim. Wow. Yud. Yes, Lois, we can add. Rashi is doch medayik b'lashoynoi. Rashi specifically in his Loshim, and he says, Elim, Keneged, Eilo Shel Yitzchok. When Rashi says the Elim, why do we have by Sukkot, the Rebbe brought by Pesach? Why does the Elim? So Rashi says the Elim corresponds to the Ayil of Yitzchok. The Rebbe says it means the Elim is all the Elim, but it says the why an Ayil? Because the Ayil of Yitzchok. What is the Shaykhas from Elim Shnayim, Yaakov, Yitzchok, Yaakov Esau that we're talking about now? So Eilish Shel Yitzchok to the Ayil of Yitzchok. Is the Bir al Zeh Bazal Derech HaRemes, explanation by way of him. When Eilish Shel Yitzchok state the Pirkei Rabbi Lezer, with regards to the Ayil of Yitzchok, it says in the Pirkei Rabbi Lezer, Ashtei Kran Rav Shel Ayil, the two horns of that Ayil, the Ayil that Ayil Nechav Asfar Bekarno that they found by Yitzchok, by the Akedah, is Shel Smoil Nishma Koila al Har Sinai. The left one of the horns, the voice was heard by Mount Sinai. The Keren Shel Yamin, and the right horn, that's going to be blown in the future to come. The chiluk zwischen the zwei inyonim, the difference between these two aspects, Matan Torah Har Sinai, and the future to come. It's a different. Is Matan Torah what Ashaychas Sweden Dafka? Matan Torah is only connected to the Yid. Torah is Merosha Kilis Yaakov. Torah is inheritance to the nation of the community of Yaakov. When Akum Shosuk Torah Chayiv Misa, a guy who learns Torah is obligated Misa. Mashenkin the Giluyim the Lost Lovely, as opposed to the revelations that will come in the future, they will also accomplish the nations as Virav Yaved Tzoyer. That the older one, Esau, will serve the younger one, meaning that it will accomplish that Esau will serve Yaakov. The Navi says the strangers will stand up and shepherd your sheep. The Pasuk even further as Epich, Amim Sofik Ruruk Chulu of the Shechem Echad. Turn them all around to serve with one shoulder. So it turns out as the Tzvei Karnayim from Eloi Shel Yitzchok, these two horns. It says Eloi Shel Yitzchok, but there's one ayil, but there's two horns there. Von der Hab Mascheiches, einer zu Jakob Yisrael, und ein zweiter zu Jakob Esau Umis. One has to do to Yaakov, which is the Yidden, which is Har Sinai. And that zweiter to Yaakov Esau, also to the Umis, the Yaakov and the Umis, because the Osid Lavi, it's going to be for both. Yudalef. From Yeno Shal Torah, Shebet Pirush Rashi. The wine of Torah and Pirush Rashi. And the Geya der Pu'ula von Akrovas, Shivin Porim, Keneged Shivin, Umis Zokt Rashi. The impact that we brought the 70 bulls to correspond to the 70 nations, Rashi says, that in the days of the Mikdash, they would protect them. By the Kvosim Zokter, but when he talks about the sheep, by the Yidden, Zokter, Tzadik Ches, and there's 98 total of the sheep, the Kalis Mehem Tzadik Ches Klolos in Mishnah Torah, to destroy and take away from them the 98 curses of Mishnah Torah. Was Kama v'Kama from the Klolos of the Mishnah Torah. Many of the curses that in Mishnah Torah is eine Shayach Davke to Zman HaGolus. They are connected specifically to the time of Golus. Need be Mei HaMikdash, not in the time of Mikdash. So the Goyim's protections are only with Mei HaMikdash, but the Yidden is protecting from the klolos which are there, which is not Davke in the time of Beis HaMikdash. They apply in the time of Golus, not the Mikdash. They're beating them. Explanation of this. Says the Tfilas connected Karbonis Tikkun. Davening takes the place of the Karbonis. Das was reflektoiftem bisman shebeis hamikdash hayikayim durch Karbonis. That which used to be accomplished in the time of the Beis Hamikdash through Karbonis, tut men itzter oiv durch Tefillah. Now we accomplish it through davening. The Chelek is over. So you have the time of the baby. We have what we accomplished in the time of the Beis Hamikdash through the Karbonis, and now we do it through davening. The Chelek is over. The difference is, however, durch Karbonis begashvis and Beis Hamikdash agashvis. Through the physical Karbonis and the physical Beis Hamikdash, kumt arob the pu'ulas hakarbonis bis in gashmis oilam. In the physical Beis Hamikdash and the Korban Gashmi, it comes down the impact of the Karbonis into the physicality of the world. In the externality of the world, in actuality, as the Likutei Torah says, Masha'enkin dur tefillah, as opposed to davening, is the pu'ula nori nefesh. It impacts only the soul. In the modern gufa, it impacts the human being. That this is the difference between the impact of the porim and the kvosim. The porim achag was davon oifton in the umis. The bulls of the Yom Tov that need to accomplish by the nations, Ken and Zayin, they can only take place Bimei Hamikdash, in the time of the Beis Hamikdash. The Madhad Gehad Karbonis Begashmis, when you had physical Karbonis. So Gehad Tapulu in Chitzonis Oilam, that had an impact in the externality of the world. Obe Meshachore Beis Hamikdash. But once the Beis Hamikdash was destroyed, there's no bottle given, so that ceased. The Kamaim and the Chazal, as I've said to say, a blessed memory, say, Oilam La'akum, Sha'avdu Ve'en Masha. Woe to the nations. They lost something. They don't know what they lost. They lost the Beis Hamikdash. Beis Hamikdash would protect them, and they have even no recognition what they really lost. So, Masha'enkim Benegeya Eden is Kivosim Keneged Yisrael Ve'en Kvudi. But the Kivosim that correspond to Eden, but they're set all the time. But the Pirush Apnimi Bazei is the inner meaning is that the Karbonis and the Kavuyim, their Pula is Kayemis Loilam. Their action is always existing. But durch Tefillah, Shekeneged Karbonis, through the davening, which is through the Karbonis, Tutman Oif, we also accomplish Chalis Mem Tzadik Ches Klolos of Mishnah Torah, to destroy and take away the 98 curses that we find in Mishnah Torah. Even once the Beis Hamikdash is destroyed, We've been exiled from our land. We're under the hand of the nations. We have no pains. We have only relaxation, peace, and quiet. To all Yidden, there is light in their settlements. While in Mitzrayim, in the problems of the Golus, this becomes the very close preparation. So the Menucha B'Sholem Amitim, to the peace and true relaxation, to the extreme completeness, wholesome fulfillment, in the fullest measure. Even more than redemption and peace from David, even more than the days of Shlomo. But in the days, as in the days of Mashiach, in the true and complete redemption through Mashiach Tzidkenu. This is Mesichas Shabbos Parshas Pinchas Tavshin Mem Aleph.